then they take out some of, or perhaps even most of the troops, but they leave the equipment behind, and then they can very quickly reinforce and move all the people back, all the troops back again if needed. So the movement of forces, the movement of Russian capabilities doesn't represent real de-escalation. But we will monitor, we will follow what they are doing, and of course we call on them to de-escalate, to withdraw troops, because the Russian military build-up in and around Ukraine is unprecedented, not only with a high number of combat-ready troops, but all the support, all the combat enablers they need to actually conduct a full-fledged invasion of Ukraine. And with all these forces, all these capabilities in place, Russia can conduct an invasion of Ukraine with very little or hardly any warning time at all. So we follow this, but at the same time we believe there is some ground for cautious optimism based on the signs coming from Moscow that they are interested in continuing diplomatic efforts and to sit down with NATO and NATO allies to find a political solution.
Okay, we'll go to
Speaking there in Brussels, saying there was news of cautious optimism, the developments we've had today, that Russia saying they are withdrawing some troops from the border with Ukraine. The Ukrainian foreign minister making it very clear, saying we will believe it when we see it. And the message from NATO there saying we urge Russia again for de-escalation and saying they are closely monitoring the situation. Of course, we're following all the developments here on GB News to make sure we keep you up to date. I'll be doing that across the day. For now, though, let's head back to the briefing with Gloria.
Coming up this hour on the briefing, the Prime Minister might have cut his trip around the country short, but we haven't. Today we'll be in Bolsover to hear the mood in a once safe Labour seat. It's good news for jobs, but bad news for wages. I'll be joined by the chairs of two common select committees to discuss that and hear what role select committees play in our democracy. New funding has been announced to support victims of domestic abuse. We'll hear from the Safeguarding Minister. And a very special and exclusive interview with Conservative MP Tom Hunt about growing up with dyslexia and dyspraxia. Cost of living crisis seems to be getting worse. New figures today show prices are continuing to rise at a faster rate than wages, meaning the pounds in your pocket aren't going as far as they did. But it's good news for the job market, with unemployment down and more jobs available. With Parliament in recess, we are also going to talk about the role of select committees in our democracy today with my next guest. I'm delighted to welcome to the show Stephen Timms, Chair of the Work and Pensions Committee. Hi, Stephen. Good to see you.
Hello, Gloria. Nice to see you.
The Office for National Statistics say that the number of UK workers on payrolls rose by 108,000 between December and January to 29.5 million. Do those figures mean that we have come through the pandemic intact as far as the jobs market is concerned?
Well, we're certainly recovering. Unemployment, as you said, is down. The big feature of these numbers, though, is that there are lots of people who were working before the pandemic who are not working now. And it does, because there are lots of people, particularly old people, although they haven't got jobs, they're not looking for jobs either. They seem to have kind of pulled the labour market altogether. They've become inactive. And that's a big part of the reason why we've got 1.3 million vacancies, a record number of vacancies across the economy. Lots of employers struggling to find the people they need to do their jobs at the moment. And a big part of the reason is lots of people just not bothering to look for a job at the moment. So that's what I think we're going to have to turn much more attention to over the next few months, how we bring those people back into the labour market.
Is it carrot or stick, in your view, to get them back into the labour market?
I think it's got to be carrot. because these are people who are living on something at the moment. We don't exactly know what, their savings or other family members or something. So there's no stick the government has got to force them back to work. They've decided they don't need to work. So we've got to encourage them. We've got to find ways of making it attractive for people to come back to jobs to fill up these vacancies, which there are so many of at the moment.
And the news on wages is problematic, and perhaps that is part of the reason why people don't see it's worth going back to work. What sort of solutions does your committee have in terms of getting wages, a fair day's work for a fair day's pay for a fair day's work?
Well, as you say, prices are going up faster than wages at the moment. So in real terms, wages are falling. We took evidence from the Secretary of State about this last week. I mean, our committee, we're the DWP committee, so we're scrutinising what the DWP is doing. And we're looking particularly at the position of people on benefit. And, you know, we've just seen the government decision to uprate benefits from April by 3%. At a time when we know inflation by then is going to be 6% or maybe more. So we were pressing the Secretary of State what the government is going to do to protect the position of people like that whose income is already very low. And I must say, we didn't get very persuasive answers. In terms of what we do to increase wages, that's a different select committee that deals with that. The government has, of course, raised the national minimum level, the so-called national living wage. But as we're seeing from these figures today, wages are still not keeping up with prices.
You are chair of this powerful select committee. It is cross-party in its nature. How do you choose the subjects for inquiry? Is there any remit for the public to get involved in how you determine what subjects are important for you to look at?
Yes. I mean, we're certainly very interested to know the things that people think we should be inquiring into. I mean, our job is to scrutinise on behalf of Parliament the work and the policies of the Department for Work and Pensions. And we do that by holding inquiries, and between the members of the committee, we choose which subjects we want to inquire about. And every now and then, I get emails from people suggesting we ought to look at a particular topic, and I'd welcome more such suggestions. And I'm sure other members of the committee would be interested to hear from members of the public about that as well. We carry out the inquiries by taking evidence, written evidence primarily. So when we launch an inquiry, we invite anyone who's got views on the subject to send them in to us. We are at the moment doing a survey as part of one of our inquiries on health assessments for disability benefits. We're asking anyone who's had experience of getting such an assessment or helping someone else have such an assessment to complete our survey, so that we know more about people's experience of how the system is working at the moment. And then we take oral evidence. So typically people who've sent us in views in writing, if they've got particularly interesting views or views we'd like to find more out about, we ask them to come to meet the committee. We meet every Wednesday morning, and we put some questions to them to explore their views further.
And finally, Stephen Timms, on a different subject, I interviewed you last year. You told me that you hoped to meet the woman who had stabbed you at a constituency surgery. She's in prison. It was an interview that stays with me. I think about it a lot, actually. I just wondered if there'd been any progress on your desire to meet that woman.
Well, thank you, Gloria, for asking. No, there hasn't. I have heard last week from the restorative justice team in the Metropolitan Police, and they said they did hope to come back to me shortly, but as yet, there hasn't been any further progress.
Stephen Timms, as ever, it is a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Gloria.
Now, the government says it's providing an extra £125 million to help survivors of domestic abuse. The Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities says the additional funding will go towards safe accommodation spaces like refuges and shelters. I'm joined now by the Safeguarding Minister, Rachel Maclean. Rachel Maclean, it is good to see you. Your first time on the show. You are very welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Gloria. Good to be here.
Domestic abuse survivors will find it easier to move away from their perpetrators under today's proposals. Just explain why that's important and how it would work.
Yeah, well, can I thank you, first of all, Gloria, for actually featuring this issue today when so much of the world's attention is focused on international issues. Rightly, we still believe that it is really important that we put in place this vital and, in many cases, unfortunately, life-saving support. So what we're announcing today is a number of different measures. Firstly, we're announcing £125 million to go to support services that operate inside shelters and specialist accommodation for victims. And also, as you just said, we are looking at changing the law and the regulations around that local interest test, which can sometimes be a barrier for a woman who needs to move away from her perpetrator and that area where those crimes took place. And we're also looking at the barriers that are in the way of some women who want to remove the perpetrator from the joint tenancy, and that can also be something that can prevent a woman from being rehoused in a place of safety if that's what she wants and needs.
It's good news, and Women's Aid have welcomed the move, but there are difficulties in how we treat those survivors of domestic abuse more widely. Domestic abuse-related incidents and crimes have doubled in the last 5 years, but the number of prosecutions has fallen every year over the same period. Survivors are being failed by the criminal justice system, aren't they?
Well, you're right to say that we still need to do more, and that's why we put into legislation the Domestic Abuse Act, which is a really landmark piece of legislation with a wide-ranging set of powers and provisions that will enable the police and the criminal justice system to respond more appropriately. It will enable children to be recognised as victims in their own right. It will mean that coercive and controlling behaviour, which is a very insidious form of abuse, often not recognised in the past, will be recognised, and we will see those perpetrators also brought to justice. But of course, there is always more to do, which is why we have significantly ramped up the funding for specialist independent domestic violence advisors in the system. We've increased funding for refuges, and we're working all the time as well, Gloria. This is something that is really difficult to do, but we must do it. We must get to the bottom of why people are actually perpetrating these offences. And part of our Violence Against Women and Girls strategy sets out that we are working through that to understand why people feel the need to abuse their partners and their loved ones in this way. Because ultimately what we want to do is we want to stamp it out.
Should misogyny be a hate crime? Would that help to stamp it out?
This is, of course, a debate that is part of, sometimes connected to this debate. It is my view that in and of itself, of course, it's an ask that some people have come forward with. We have looked at this through the Law Commission, and their advice at the moment is that could unfortunately have actually the completely opposite effect, make it harder to prosecute some very serious crimes such as rape and sexual assault. But what we're doing is we're looking at the hate crime legislation in the round. We're also looking at some of these other offences, such as street harassment, to see whether we do have the right legislative framework here. What we want to see is people who are perpetrating violence against women and girls in all its forms being brought to justice and receiving those tough sentences. And I must say that we have got some tougher sentences on a lot of these crimes in the Police Crime and Sentencing Bill, which is why it's really important that we get that bill onto the statute book.
And finally, while we have you, the Foreign Secretary, your colleague Liz Truss, has been speaking to the media this morning. The Prime Minister, she says, is cooperating fully with the police investigation. It's reported that the Prime Minister will argue that he was working during an alleged party. Isn't the problem with that defence was that there was alcohol there, and you don't drink alcohol while you're at work?
Well, Gloria, I don't have anything to add to what the Foreign Secretary said. It is an ongoing investigation. I know that the Prime Minister has made commitments about the process and how he will update Parliament on that.
Safeguarding Minister Rachel Maclean, really good to talk to you today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
So this week we're looking at some of the important work done by Parliament in holding the government to account and giving a voice to the public too. In the past, the voice of the public was represented solely by their MPs, but these days people can sign petitions directly and have those subjects debated in the House of Commons. Joining me now to learn more about the work of the Public Petitions Committee is the chair of the Petitions Committee, Catherine McKinnell MP. Hello, Catherine. Good to see you today.
Hi, Gloria.
You are arguably the chair of the most important committee in Parliament because you facilitate parliamentary debate on subjects that the public want debated. I think it's a great thing. It was introduced by David Cameron's government, and I think it's a really important part of democracy being in action. But are these debates treated with the significance they deserve in Parliament?
So many people are surprised to learn that actually petitions debates are some of the most popular pieces of parliamentary business that the public engage with. They regularly receive 10 times the viewers of Prime Minister's questions. So the public are definitely interested. And I think as the public contact their MPs increasingly about petitions that they've signed and issues that they're interested in, then I think increasingly MPs are taking up these issues and joining in the debates as well. And we've debated so many issues over the last couple of years since I was elected chair. It's a real honour to be chair of a committee that connects so directly with the public and gives voice to the public in such a direct way in Parliament.
And is it possible to detect trends and themes which determine the most popular debates that are demanded by the public?
Yes, I mean, we have a process whereby if a petition gets over 10,000 signatures, we demand on behalf of the petitioners a response from the government, a written response. If it gets over 100,000, we automatically consider it for debate. So that does create a threshold for the number of people that are expressing concern or an interest in the subject. But quite often we do, particularly during the pandemic, we've had a number of petitions that deal with a range of issues that are all relatively connected. So they may be to do with COVID rules, they may be to do with sport and the ability to undertake it, or they may be to do with healthcare and different aspects. So sometimes we have put those petitions together to ensure that these issues do get debated in Parliament and get the time to be debated. I have to say one of the most popular petitions we've had in this Parliament was ending child food poverty, and that was obviously pioneered by Marcus Rashford, and we did get the government to move on that issue, which was really positive outcome for the petitioners and also, of course, the children that got supported through their holidays with food.
It's a cross-party committee. You are the chair, but you work with MPs from all parties. Does party politics ever get in the way of how you conduct the business, or is it all sweetness and light, despite you being in different political parties?
Do you know what's really good about committees is that they are, like, as chairs, we're elected by the whole House. So we're not just elected by our own party MPs, we're elected by the whole House. So we have a responsibility to respond to that appropriately. But also all the committees are made up of different parties as well. And so we have to work really hard to find the things that unite us. And so there might be Conservative MPs on my committee that are just as concerned about getting a change in the law as I am, or an SNP MP on the committee. So, for example, we've had many petitions on pet theft and the concerns around that being treated as though it's just an object, as opposed to, you know, an animal that really is part of your family. If anyone's got a pet, they'll know exactly what I mean. And I know that that's been very much pioneered by the Conservative members on the committee as much as Labour. And we have got the government to introduce new legislation on that. So really, it's about responding to the public. It's not about party politics. There are some things that some of us feel more strongly about than others and feel more naturally aligned to, but actually many of the issues that the public are raising are nothing to do with party politics. They just want to see change.
And just remind our viewers, if they have got a bee in their bonnet about something, if they want Parliament to demand something that they are passionate about, to debate something that they are passionate about, just remind them of how to conduct the process. How do they get there?
So you go online, it's an online website, petitions.uk, and you can either start your own petition, or there might be a petition there already that deals with the issue that you're concerned about. And actually, some of the most successful petitions are ones where somebody really taps into something that perhaps isn't being talked about, but through the petition, suddenly many people around the country are really concerned about this issue. I mean, one of the most powerful petitions I've dealt with this year is about water safety. And it's really shocking. About 400 people in the UK lose their lives in water, open water, every year. Yet if we just educated about that in schools, and a very short amount of time needed, about 20 minutes for every child, we could prevent so many of those deaths. So it was a very powerful petition. And really, that's the only way that this has been addressed, because in each part of the country, there's only been 1 or 2 cases. So actually, it's putting them together that makes you see, actually, this is a national problem and it needs a national response. And that's an ongoing campaign. But there are so many examples, and really, they're driven by the petitioners and their passion, and often their personal stories too, which are very moving.
Catherine McKinnell, I make this commitment to you on GB News. We will always seek to cover those public petitions debates. We think that they are amongst the most important parliamentary debates. Thank you for your time, Chair of the Petitions Committee, Catherine McKinnell. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Coming up, we have an exclusive interview with Conservative MP Tom Hunt, where he shares with me what it's like growing up with dyslexia and dyspraxia. First, it is the news with Rosie.
Good afternoon to you. It is 12:30. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The NATO Secretary-General says there is room for cautious optimism over the situation in Ukraine and repeated calls for Russia to pursue a diplomatic resolution. But Jens Stoltenberg said his organisation had not seen any sign of physical military de-escalation on the ground from the Russian side. Well, that's after the Russian Defence Ministry says they're returning some troops from the Ukrainian border after completing what they're calling training exercises. The number of UK workers in formal employment rose again at the beginning of this year. The Office for National Statistics said the number of UK workers in formal employment climbed by 108,000 between December and January. Salaries rose in the last quarter of the year, but continued to lag behind inflation, which is at a near 30-year high. World tennis star Novak Djokovic says he will not defend his Wimbledon or French Open titles if the tournaments require mandatory vaccination for competitors. Speaking to the BBC, he said it was a price he was willing to pay and that he prioritised what he puts into his body over a trophy. Northern Ireland's remaining coronavirus restrictions will be lifted and replaced instead by guidance. The rules requiring face masks in public places and the need to show COVID certificates for nightclubs will be dropped. The country's health minister will make an order revoking the rules later today. One of the developers of the Oxford AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine will collect her damehood today. Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert will receive the honour at Windsor Castle for her services to science and public health. You're now up to date here on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Shortly, we'll be back to the briefing with Gloria.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
and I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
The Prime Minister has cut short his UK travel plans to focus on the situation in Ukraine. He's been chairing a Cobra meeting to address the crisis. While Boris Johnson might have ended his UK tour a bit early, we haven't. This week, we're going around former Red Wall seats, historic Labour strongholds, which switched to the Conservatives in 2019, asking about their voting intention. Today, we're heading to Bolsover, a former mining community in the East Midlands, and our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, is there. Hi, Will.
Good afternoon. Yes, you'll remember, as will many journalists who had to work the 2019 election, as well as the tens of thousands, possibly millions of people that stayed up that night to watch the election results in 2019. The celebration of Conservatives when they did take the Red Wall seats like this one in Bolsover, where the MP Dennis Skinner held this seat for 49 years. Coalfields across the Midlands, these northern powerhouses where the Labour stronghold was so strong, nobody would have ever expected that a Tory would one day be an MP in areas like Bolsover. It's a constituency of around 70,000 people, around 80,000 people in the district, so not just Bolsover as a town, the mining towns dotted around, which faced devastating effects of the closure of the pits throughout the 80s and the 90s. Bolsover's pit closed in 91. When we look back to that election of 2019 and we remember the celebrations of people like Boris Johnson, one of the things he said on the morning was, thank you for lending me your vote. That's because people here aren't necessarily and weren't necessarily die-hard Conservative fans. They hadn't turned over and they were going to be blue forever. They mainly did vote for Brexit. That's one of the reasons why so many red seats turned towards the Tories after being Labour voters for generations. So with all of this stories recently about the parties, with the COVID lockdowns and so many people moving away from the favour of Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party that they did manage to gain in the 2019 election, we've come out to Bolsover and many other places across Britain to speak to people who did turn to the Tories. How do they feel now, and do they trust their politicians?
I've never really trusted them. They're all different colours, but they're like Smarties. They all taste just the same, so I don't think it matters very much.
He's not a very good Prime Minister. The parties would normally not be very important, but in fact it's a question of trust. And he's certainly done away with that trust, and people don't believe any of the messages they hear now. That's a big problem. It seems a bit trivial that it's all about parties, but then again, there were so many when everybody else was playing by the rules.
No, I don't really trust politicians. Some politicians I do, some I don't. The majority I feel are disappointing.
I think Keir Starmer's more trustworthy, but it's a bit too gentle to be too much of a gentleman, I think, to be an opposition leader. He's not giving enough stick to the other side.
It has been a betrayal. I wouldn't trust the Conservatives again. Definitely not. As I say, I would steer towards Labour. It was a good Labour constituency, this, and I know Dennis is retired, but he was a good politician for this area, and he brought a lot of jobs back to this area when the mines closed.
I think Boris Johnson was good apart from the parties and all that that's happened, but
apart from that, he tried to get free broadband, he tried to level up, and he's tried to, HS2, he's tried to do a lot of good things, but now it's been overshadowed. COVID came in, and suddenly everybody's looking at parties. So he's sunk his own canoe, really, but his start was quite good and promising.
I've always voted Labour, and always will do, because we're working class. And he's on about this levelling up on one thing and another. We can't see anything what he's doing this way on, up north and Midlands. He's not, I don't think there's any levelling up being done up here. It's all down that end, down London, isn't it? No, the sooner he goes, the better, and that's all I've got to say.
It's always great to hear the real everyday views of voters here in the Derbyshire town, Bolsover and so many towns along this Red Wall tour that we're taking at the moment. You would have heard people in that set of Vox Pops saying how affectionately they think of Dennis Skinner, who held this seat for 49 years, from 1970 to 2019. He was a socialist. He was referred to affectionately by his friends as the Beast of Bolsover, probably with a sense of terror from his enemies in the Tory party. You'll remember the way that he was often known for his outbursts, particularly on the opening of Parliament, Black Rod. He had many funny outbursts. People said that they would like to vote for him if he was run again. He's now retired. Mark Fletcher, the Conservative MP, I think he would very much like to keep this seat. It's quite interesting that so many of the people that I spoke to in that clip that you just saw there are very unsure, because they did give their vote to the Tories in 2019, and even with each of these things that has happened recently in the last 6 months before Christmas, and with COVID and all of the decisions that some people would say quite rightly had to be made about protecting the country, a lot of people are still very undecided. And if there was an election tomorrow, it is very hard to say how these Red Wall seats, how these turning Tory seats would vote. A lot of people, however, that I did spoke to when Boris Johnson said in 2019 that he had people had lent him their votes, a lot of people, if there was an election tomorrow, I think they would be reclaiming that debt.
Will Hollis, I loved listening to those voices. Thanks so much for bringing them to us. Thank you, Will Hollis from Bolsover. Now, it's time for one of my very special interviews with MPs, where we go behind the politics, get to know the real person. Today, it's a fascinating interview with Conservative MP Tom Hunt, who was diagnosed with dyslexia and dyspraxia at the age of 12. Have a listen. So, Tom Hunt, when I was doing my research, it seems like you had quite a comfortable start in life. Is that fair to say?
I think in many respects I did. I went to a good school. I had two parents who cared about me, loved me, and they're still with me. And I had some grandparents that also, I think, had a pretty positive influence on me. But I think in other respects, I don't think things were easy for me. I mean, I had quite significant learning disabilities at school. When I was 12, I had a reading and writing age for an 8-year-old. You know, schoolwork never came easy to me. I mean, I don't think I could do my shoelaces until I was about 14. I couldn't do my tie until I left university. So,
really, my goodness, let's take all of those in turn, because this is so interesting. So, you were diagnosed at 12 with
dyslexia and dyspraxia. Yeah.
We all know what dyslexia is. Tell us about dyspraxia.
Dyspraxia is basically immaturities in movement, and it's being very bad at process and very bad at knowing steps and sequences. So which is probably one of the reasons why I wasn't very good at maths, and one of the reasons why I couldn't do my shoelaces until I was 14. One of the reasons why I couldn't do a tie until I was at university. And it does also impacts your organisation, impacts your ability to plan things, and it just means that you process things in a very different way.
But you can't really process these facts when you're at school, because how do you process it? You just want to be like every other kid, right?
Well, I mean, when I was sort of 12, or before I was 12, when I was 11, when I was 10, 8, 9, I was very interested in sport. That was mainly what I wanted to do. I wanted to play football. I was into my go-karting. I wasn't interested in schoolwork. And my teachers had said to me that I was a long way behind, and I never really took it very seriously. And I just sort of thought, oh, it'll be okay, it'll be okay, it'll be okay. But then it was when I think it was when I was 12, and they had a much more serious conversation with me. And they said that unless I made serious improvements, then they'd have to take me out of the school because I was that far behind. But, I was just used to being that person in my class, eyes glazed over, not understanding why I couldn't process information in the same way as everybody else, knowing deep down that I wasn't thick, but most of the time being made to feel like I was. And I'm not going to blame anybody for that because I don't think there was a huge amount of understanding at the time of things like dyslexia and dyspraxia. But when I got diagnosed with dyslexia and dyspraxia, which I was quite lucky to be diagnosed at 12, I did get some very powerful interventions made by specialists who, they took me out of French. Immediately they took me out of French. The school had the flexibility to make that decision, and they gave me the one-to-one personalised support that I needed, so that I, over time, overcame those disabilities and did pretty well in my GCSEs, did quite well in my A-levels, and then I ended up doing history and politics at Manchester and then doing a master's at Oxford in Russian history. So one way or another, from being 12 and having a really around age of an 8-year-old, through first-class support, I developed techniques and ways of learning that meant that when I was a 22-year-old, could look back at it and think I've been academically successful, which for me was never a likelihood. But I would say that I was incredibly fortunate to be in a position where I had the support that I had. I was at an independent school, and half the reason why my dad fought to keep me there was because he felt I needed that additional support. So my fear is that, and for me it was touch and go. I mean, I could have not got anywhere near to where I ended up going to academically, but my fear is that perhaps I was looking at young people with the kind of disabilities that I had. Maybe I was 1 in 10 who was able to get through it. So my passion is to try and make sure that all Toms with those disabilities, regardless of their family circumstances, are given the educational opportunities and support that they need to achieve their full potential. And it really shouldn't matter whether their parents happen to be in a position where they can afford to provide the kind of support that I got. So for me, that's probably the number one burning passion that I've got.
It's a good passion. And it was interesting, you said that you knew you weren't thick. How many people, kids, I don't know if this is too tough a question, do you think who have dyspraxia or dyslexia, do you think, or do you worry, are written off as thick?
I think less so now.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure my dad has the same disabilities that I have, but he never found out. And he still doesn't think he's got them. But I think he's got the same disabilities that I've got. So there's more awareness now. There's more of an appreciation that not all people think in the same way. Their brains don't all work in the same way. They don't process information in the same way. But I still think we've got a long way to go. And I still think there are a lot of young people with learning disabilities who are being characterised in a certain way, being told that they can't achieve, where if they were given the right support, it's not just about them treading water. Given the right support, they can fly, because a lot of them are very creative.
Do you regard yourself as disabled?
No, I wouldn't. I'd also say that there's some people who have got dyspraxia who I've been involved in things like Dyspraxia Foundation, and there are some people who do have dyspraxia, and it impacts them in a more significant way than it does impact me. So I wouldn't say I was disabled.
So there were a few examples that you gave. Now, I'm guessing your reading age of 8 when you were 12, then I think we probably know enough to think, could that be dyslexia? Tying shoelaces and tying your tie, are these common things that we need to, are these common symptoms of dyspraxia? They are.
That's more your dyspraxia. So
yes.
What makes it difficult is there are actually some connections between dyslexia and dyspraxia.
Okay.
So there are some things where it's difficult to know whether that's a dyslexia at play or the dyspraxia. But I'm pretty sure that the shoelaces and the ties was dyspraxia.
Yes.
Because that's very much steps and sequences. So, something else is computers, process. Anything like that, I'm all at sea.
Gosh.
Yeah.
I'm thinking this is,
really struggle with the transitions between stages in my life as well. So when I went into the workplace, that took a long time for me to adapt to the workplace. And we have our own ways of processing information. And it can sometimes take a lot longer
Yeah.
For things to, but when it goes into a right part of the brain,
it's there.
It's there, and then all of a sudden I become above average probably at retention of knowledge.
Yeah.
But it's just it works in a different way, and I just think having an education system where there is that appreciation that not all young people process information in the same way, and if they process information in a different way, that doesn't mean that they're worse or better or inferior. It just means they're different. And actually, I think having an education system embraces difference through things like teacher training and everything else, I think is very important.
How does your dyslexia, first of all, affect you today?
My dyslexia is, I can sometimes, I mean, again, I think it goes back to this point here, is it with dyslexia, is it with dyspraxia? My personal view is with dyspraxia is more of an issue for me than with dyslexia.
In what way?
Because of the things like the disorganisation, being bad at process. Sometimes, I'm at my worst if I'm in a big group of people. If I'm in a big group of people and we've got somebody at the front of the group of 30, say, sort of outlining instructions for how to do some practical task.
Yeah.
I will be the worst one out of 30. You can bet your bottom dollar on that. I'll be absolutely...
Me too.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got me thinking I'm terrible at laces.
Yeah.
I can't fill in forms.
Yeah.
Is that a thing? I can't do technology.
Yeah, I mean,
forms, I like a joke that I've got a phobia about forms. Anyway, it's not a counselling session for me, it's you.
But some of my loved ones do think that I've been sometimes used my dyspraxia for an excuse for my wherever I go seems to be mess, like my flat's a mess, or things like that. And they'll say that I shouldn't be always getting the violins out, but I try not to use these things as a crutch. I think if it's me being lazy or me just not doing something, I like to think that I step up to that. And actually being a member of Parliament, I find is good in the sense that you've got a team of people to support you.
Yeah.
So the great team that I have around me, they have the skill sets that mean that I don't really feel like having dyspraxia and dyslexia as an MP is a major problem. So I feel that is very liberating, the fact that I have some great people around me who are able to provide that core competence that means that I can really focus on the things that I'm good at.
You're really good at this.
And
you are really good at speaking out.
To be honest, I think when I did my maiden speech in Parliament, I wasn't really sure what I was going to say. I mean, obviously I knew I was going to talk about constituency, I knew I was going to give some basic background about growing up and things like that, but I didn't know the extent to which I was going to make a big thing about my dyslexia and dyspraxia because I hadn't spoken about it that much beforehand. But I just think it's very important that people with dyslexia and dyspraxia and any other kind of disability know that if you're determined and you get the right support, there's no reason why you can't really go on and do things. But I must just raise a point that we're doing a report at the moment on the education committee, a prison education report, and I was shocked when I found out that almost half of those in prison have got some kind of learning disability. So for me, this further underlines why it's so important to get special educational needs provision right, because it's not just a matter about the individuals and the families, but it's about society as a whole. And it's about saying that if we don't get special educational needs provision right, we're losing their talents. And often there can be a fine line between going on and being very successful and ending up in the criminal justice system, going down the wrong direction. And if your needs aren't being met, and you're in an education setting where you feel as though you're not understood, people don't understand you, you can't be successful, it's incredibly frustrating. And you can understand if you feel like the system's failing you, it's very tempting to turn against that system. So therefore, I don't find it that surprising that there are so many people in prison who have got learning disabilities, whose needs haven't been met, who more than likely weren't in a position that I was, where I had a parent who was in a position to be able to put me into the school that he did put me into.
Do you think you've ever suffered discrimination in your later life because of either dyslexia or dyspraxia? Are there forms of discrimination that we need to stamp out in your own experience?
I wouldn't say blatant. I think sometimes there isn't a huge amount of awareness, particularly of dyspraxia. And it's my advice to anyone would be, if you want to know more, is just look it up. The Wikipedia page is actually quite good in terms of providing an explanation as to the key characteristics. I think usually when I've told people or an employer that I've got dyslexia and dyspraxia, or dyspraxia in particular, because as I've said, I think that affects me the most, they do look into it, and then they tend to understand more about sort of how we are. But An interesting point is about how dyspraxia may impact personal relations as well, and how that may be the case as well.
Do you have a partner, Tom?
And how it's not just a learning disability but a behavioural issue as well, potential. I don't know. I'm still a bachelor. I'm still single, and actually that hasn't been threatened to be. There's been no threat of that changing since I've been an MP. I must say, the lifestyle's been, incredibly busy, and I don't really know how I'd find the time really. And actually, when I do get free time, I sort of think to myself, on the odd night I do have free, I'd probably rather catch up with a friend because I'll be guaranteed to have a good time. Whereas if I go on a speculative date, I don't know whether it's going to be a waste of time or not.
It's hard being single when you're an MP, isn't it? Because how do you do it? 'Cause you're unlikely to meet your partner in Parliament. And it's tough using the websites, which everybody now uses if you're an MP.
Well, when I first got elected, I sort of thought that there'd be all these events and stuff, and maybe I might meet somebody naturally, organically. But of course, COVID hit in sort of like March 2020, so that was all that sort of. So I'm fine. I'm 33. I'm sure I'll find someone, but I'm not going to. I'm quite content at the moment, focusing on my job and everything else.
I reckon you'll have a lot of offers after people have seen this interview.
Well, hopefully hopefully has a desired effect. Yeah.
It's been an absolute pleasure. One of the most interesting interviews I've ever done. Thank you. What a champion you are for people with dyslexia and dyspraxia. Thank you, Tom. I loved that interview. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. The show is back every weekday from noon. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan. But for now, I'll leave you with your weather.
Hello. Some wet weather around today, and things are going to stay very lively with our weather through this week. A couple of storms on the way. Storm Dudley through Wednesday, and then Storm Eunice on Friday. Ahead of that, we've got this weather system bringing rain today, and then another low arrives tonight. The winds start to pick up, and then the next low, this is Storm Dudley arriving through Wednesday, mostly affecting the northern half of the UK. More on that in a moment. First of all, let's get back to today, because wet weather affecting East Anglia and the southeast. A soggy Tuesday here, but turning a bit brighter across the Midlands and Wales this afternoon with sunny spells. There will be showers across Scotland with some snow in those showers, mostly over the hills. Temperatures, well, single figures for most, but double digits across the south. Not feeling all that pleasant, though, with the rain across the southeast. That scoots away through this evening, and then it turns drier for a time before the next weather system brings rain across the country through this evening. Snow across Scotland, again, mostly over hills, above about 200 or 300 metres. There could be some snow building up through the night. That weather system's almost out of the way by Wednesday morning. It's a blustery day on Wednesday everywhere. And then the next batch of rain comes in from the west. And again, some of this rain is going to be heavy, and the winds continue to strengthen. Some good spells of sunshine across eastern England during Wednesday morning. But that next weather system, this is Storm Dudley. The wind's really picking up across Northern Ireland, western Scotland through Wednesday afternoon, and then strengthening further through the evening across parts of Northern England also. So we do have warnings in place. An amber warning covering southern Scotland, the north coast of Northern Ireland and Northern England. Broader yellow warning in place as well. So this is Wednesday afternoon into the overnight period. The amber warning in place, and as Dudley clears away then through Thursday, another low arrives. This is Storm Eunice, which is likely to bring problems and disruption across the southern half of the UK on Friday. Bye for now.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
I'm Liam Halligan. Join me every weekday at 1 p.m. for On the Money, your daily dose of economics, business and consumer news. I've got 25 years experience covering economics and finance. We hold grown-up discussions with a host of experts who really know their stuff. We can't buy gas and store it. That was a mistake, wasn't it?
I think it was a mistake.
Even you, Liam, don't have a crystal ball.
Inflation's a real threat.
Every weekday at 1, you're On the Money.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.